There is a particular kind of rest that comes from a story you have already lived through. You know how the war ends. You know who Aang becomes and what it costs him. And you no longer need to watch closely to follow any of it. So the watching softens into listening. The animation goes on somewhere past your eyelids, and what stays with you is the sound of it. The low warmth of Iroh, the dry edges of Sokka, the way Toph speaks as though the world owes her an explanation. In that half-awake state, when you are not quite asleep and no longer fully here, these voices feel less like a show and more like people talking in the next room while you drift. You do not have to think. The story has already happened, and it will happen again tomorrow, exactly the same, waiting for you. Tonight, we stay with one quiet thread running through all of it. Who among these characters is truly clever, and who only appears to be, and what the show itself seems to believe, intelligence actually is. Welcome to Ember. This is a place to slow down and let a familiar world hold you for a few hours. There's nothing here you need to keep up with. Turn the lights down or off. Settle into whatever position lets your shoulders finally drop. If you fall asleep before we reach the end, that is not a failure, that is the entire point. And the words will still be here when you wake, or when you do not. Let your breathing lengthen, let the room go soft at the corners. We are going to move slowly through a long story you already know by heart, looking at the minds inside it. And there is no hurry at all, none. So let yourself begin to sink, while the fire burns low, and the voices carry on without needing you to answer. Before any character can be ranked, a harder question has to be settled first, and it is the question this whole ranking rests on. What are we actually measuring when we call someone smart? Avatar, The Last Airbender, more than almost any animated series of its era, refuses to give a single answer. It scatters its definitions of intelligence across kings and servants, across old men pouring tea and blind children standing barefoot in the dirt, and it never once lets any one of them claim the word for good. So before we begin to argue about who sits at the top and who sits at the bottom, it is worth slowing down and asking what the show itself believes intelligence to be, because the answer is not simple, and the disagreements inside it are the entire reason this ranking is difficult. Consider the framework the series hands us through a swordmaster. In the third book, in the episode called Sokka's Master, a man named Piandao takes on the least likely of students, and at the end of their time together, tells him what impressed him. It was not his skill with a blade. What Piandao names, in effect, are three qualities, and he uses the exact words: creativity, versatility, intelligence. These, he says, are the traits that define a great swordsman. Sit with that for a moment. A master of physical combat, a man whose entire life is the sword, locates greatness not in the arm but in the mind behind it. The weapon is almost incidental. What matters is how the person thinks. And Piandao does not only say this, he builds his whole method around it. The training he gives Sokka is not what a viewer expects from a warrior. There is calligraphy, there is landscape painting, there is rock gardening, the slow, patient arrangements of stones. To an impatient eye, these look like distractions from the real work of learning to fight. But Piandao frames them as inseparable from it. To move a brush across paper with control, to compose a landscape, to feel where a single stone belongs in a garden. These are the same faculties that make a swordsman deadly. The physical and the intellectual are not two departments of a person. They are one thing seen from two angles. This is the first pillar of the show's argument, and it is a generous one. Intelligence, in Piandao's telling, is creative range, the ability to bring many different disciplines to bear on a single problem. Now hold that gracious, expansive picture next to a single deadpan line from the very same episode. Katara, praising Toph, says that no one can read a map like her, and Toph replies that she cannot read at all. The joke lands because it is literally true. Toph has been blind since birth, and as far as anyone in that world seems to have devised, there is no system of raised letters for the fingers, so she is genuinely unable to read a page, by the measure that most cultures reach for first, the measure of the book and the written word, Toph would be called unlettered. And yet no one who watches the series would dare call her unintelligent. That contradiction is deliberate. The show sets its most conventional yardstick beside one of its sharpest minds and lets you feel the yardstick fail. Where does Toph's intelligence live then, if not on the page? The answer comes earlier, in the second book, in the episode where we first meet her, the blind bandit. She explains it herself plainly, without drama. She sees with earthbending. It is, she says, kind of like seeing with her feet. She feels the vibrations in the earth. Think about what that means as a form of knowing. It is entirely non-verbal. It cannot be written down, cannot be studied from a scroll, cannot be quizzed. It is perception fused with skill, a way of reading the world that no library could ever teach. And the series presents this not as a consolation for what she lacks, but as a genuine and formidable intelligence, central to who she is. Piandao gives us intelligence as creative breadth. Toph gives us intelligence as a deep, embodied, wordless mastery. Already, our single category is splitting in two. It splits again with a Mad King. Back in the first book, in The King of Amashu, Aang meets Bumi, and Bumi hands him a challenge that looks impossible until Aang sees the city's mail delivery slide system in a new way and turns it to his purpose. When Aang solves it, Bumi tells him, in effect, to open his brains to the possibilities. And later, speaking of the eventual confrontation with Fire Lord Ozai, he says he hopes Aang will think like a mad genius. Notice what Bumi is doing here. He is tying genius explicitly to the act of reframing a problem, of looking at a fixed thing, a delivery chute, a war, and refusing to see it the way everyone else does. For Bumi, raw bending power is not the decisive factor. Unconventional thought is. The mad part of mad genius is not madness for its own sake. It is the willingness to abandon the obvious answer. This is a third kind of intelligence, and it sits somewhere between strategy and sheer play. It is the mind that solves, by turning the whole board sideways. Then there is the quiet teacher, and with him the argument reaches its most explicit form. In the second book, in Bitter Work, Uncle Iroh sets out to teach Zuko how to redirect lightning, and he does something strange for a firebending lesson, drawing on forms he once watched waterbenders use. He uses diagrams of all four: water, earth, fire, air, laid out together, because Iroh believes the elements illuminate one another, and he gives the principle behind it out loud. It is important, he says, to draw wisdom from many different places, for if you take it from only one place, it becomes rigid and stale. This is nearly a thesis statement. For everything Piandao demonstrated with his brushes and his stones, intelligence is not depth in one narrow channel. It is the refusal to be confined to one channel at all. A mind that draws from many sources stays supple. A mind that draws from one hardens and dies. Iroh is describing, in effect, the difference between wisdom and mere expertise. But the show is too honest to leave its portrait of intelligence purely admiring, and this is the turn that makes the whole ranking serious, rather than a simple celebration. In the third book, in The Puppet Master, an elderly waterbender named Hummer teaches Katara a technique she herself invented, bloodbending. Hummer defines it directly. It's controlling the water in another body, enforcing your own will over theirs. Understand what that invention represents. It is applied intelligence of the highest order, a woman working alone in captivity, reasoning her way to a power no one had conceived before. By every measure of creativity and problem solving the series has praised so far, Hami is brilliant, and she uses that brilliance to dominate and to abuse. Her genius is real, and it is turned toward cruelty, which forces the final piece of the framework into place. After learning the technique, Katara refuses it. She tells Hammer, in effect, that she will not use bloodbending, and she will not allow Hammer to keep terrorizing the town. In that refusal, the show plants something that pure intellect cannot supply: a moral check, an emotional judgment about what a mind should and should not do with its own power. Hammer has the technical mastery. Katara has the thing that governs it. And there, in the space between the two of them, our simple question about who is smartest slowly becomes something larger. To rank these characters, we will have to weigh book learning against street sense, creative reframing against embodied instinct, and raw brilliance against the wisdom to restrain it. Those are the scales. In the chapters that follow, we begin to place characters upon them. There is a moment in the second book of this series, in the episode simply called The Drill, when the Fire Nation stops relying on fire at all. Notice how strange that is for a story built on the idea of elemental power. The weapon aimed at the outer wall of Ba Sing Se is not a firebender or a battalion or a dragon. It is a machine. In the war room, War Minister Qin describes it as a feat of scientific ingenuity and raw destructive power. And those are the exact words, and they matter because they announce a new kind of threat. The conquest of the last great Earth Kingdom stronghold is to be handed not to a soldier, but to an engineer's drawing brought to life. The drill is the argument the whole chapter answers. That same War Minister Qin assures the group that the machine's metal shell is impervious to any earthbending attack. And here the show is doing something quietly clever. It is removing the obvious solution before anyone can reach for it. Earthbending is the pride of the kingdom that built this wall. Earthbending is the reason this wall has stood through most of the war, even though it was breached once before, when Iroh's forces broke past the outer defences years earlier, and the enemy has designed a weapon specifically to make earthbending useless against it. The floor is metal, the shell is metal. The one power everyone in this place trusts has been engineered out of the fight before the fight begins. Watch what the Earth Kingdom does in response, because it is exactly the wrong thing, and the show knows it is the wrong thing. The general on the wall sends an elite unit of earthbenders to attack the drill directly. These are not amateurs, they are the best benders the defense can offer, sent to do the one thing benders do, which is throw earth and stone at the problem with everything they have. Their assault fails. It fails not because they are weak, but because they are answering a new kind of problem with an old kind of solution. Brute force against a shell built to shrug off brute force. The wall's proudest weapon breaks itself on the enemy's cleverest one, and nothing changes. The drill keeps turning. So the question passes to the small group of travellers who happen to be there. And when they are asked how to stop the machine, one person is singled out. Sokka is called the idea guy of the team. It is worth sitting with how the show frames this. In a group that contains the Avatar himself, a boy who can bend all four elements, and Toph, perhaps the most gifted earthbender alive, the moment does not turn to either of them. It turns to the one member who cannot bend anything at all. The plan does not come from power, it comes from the person whose only tool has always been thinking. And here is the part that makes Sokka a genuine strategist rather than a lucky guesser. His solution does not arrive from nowhere. He builds it out of something he has already seen. He remembers Dai Li, the Fire Nation acrobat who disables benders by striking their pressure points, who he'd describe, in his own rough way, as someone who takes a fighter down from the inside. Sokka takes that image and turns it into a principle. If a body can be defeated by finding its weak points and hitting them from within, then so can a machine. The brute force attack on the outside had already failed, exactly as it failed for the Terror team. So the drill must be taken down from the inside by its pressure points, meaning its weak points. This is the whole method of his mind in a single leap. He watches how one thing works, abstracts the rule underneath it, and applies that rule somewhere no one else would think to apply it. A person becomes a machine, a martial art becomes an engineering diagnosis. Notice too that Sokka does not simply decide to go stab the drill somewhere and hope. His plan has a prerequisite, and the prerequisite is information. Before anyone goes inside, he needs the schematics, plan of the machine, as he says, something that will show what the inside looks like, so the group can locate the weak points before they commit to reaching them. This is a small detail and an enormous one. A hero, driven by instinct, charges in. An engineer studies the blueprint first. Sokka wants the drawing of the thing, so that the strike, when it comes, lands where it will actually matter. He's not looking for a place to hit. He's looking for the place, and he refuses to move until he knows where it is. Then there is the matter of getting there unseen, and even this he solves by making something rather than by fighting through it. There is a hole beneath the drill, and the group needs to cross open ground under the eyes of the Fire Nation to reach it. Sokka's answer is to whip up some cover, a screen of dust and sand thrown across the approach, so the group can move to the opening and slip inside without being spotted. Consider how consistent this is. Every piece of his contribution is a fabrication of the mind. The diagnosis is fabricated from a memory. The entry is fabricated from dust. He does not have an element to throw, so he manufactures the conditions the plan requires. He builds the situation he needs to win in. The show is honest enough to mark the cost of the machine's design on their own side too. Toph will not go inside, unable to bend or sense anything through the drill's solid metal shell. The greatest Earthbender among them chooses to stay outside, working the earth from there instead of following the others in. She says instead that she will try to slow the drill down from outside. It is a small, telling division of labour. The bender stays out in the world, where her power still works. The non-bender goes into the metal belly of the thing, where power does not matter, and only the plan does. The whole hierarchy of this world, benders above, everyone else below, briefly inverts for the length of one mission, and inside, the plan holds. According to the record kept of this episode, once they are within the machine, the group disables the drill by striking its structural weak points, precisely the pressure points Sokka reasoned toward from watching Dai Li. Aang finishes it by driving an earthen wedge into the outer shell, which dislodges the support beams and causes the shell to collapse, and the drill explodes when its slurry pipes burst under the pressure that has built up inside it. Look closely at how it dies. It is not blown apart from the outside by a greater force. It is undone from within, its own internal pressure turned against it, its own structure made to fail. The machine built to shrug off every earthbending assault is destroyed by an attack that understood it well enough to stop attacking the shell. This is the chapter's thesis rendered in wreckage. Not the strongest bending, but the most exact idea. The drill is the 13th episode of the second book, the 33rd of the whole series, directed by Giancarlo Volpe, and it first aired in September of 2006. I mention the credit because it helps to remember that these choices were made by people, that someone decided the war machine should be beaten by the boy without a bending art, and that this was written as a deliberate answer to the question of what such a boy is for. The series had spent a season and more letting Sokka be the one who could not do the impressive thing. Here, it shows exactly what the impressive thing is worth against a problem it was not designed for, and exactly what a good plan is worth against a problem that was. The same mind reappears a book later, though the facts I can give you of it are only the beginning of a longer story, and the beginning is enough to see the pattern hold. In the third book, after the failed invasion, Sokka goes privately to Zuko and asks him where Fire Nation prisoners taken in that invasion would be held. The privacy of the question tells you what it costs him. His father, Hakoda, was among those captured, and Sokka does not announce his grief to the group. He carries it to the one person who might have the information he needs, and he asks the practical question, the where, the logistics of it, because that is the shape his caring takes. He turns a personal wound into a problem with a location. Zuko's answer is not encouraging. He tells Sokka the prisoners were likely sent to the Boiling Rock, which he calls the highest security prison, in the Fire Nation. And those are his words. It sits on an island in the middle of a boiling lake, and Zuko describes it plainly as inescapable. Hold that word for a moment. Because of who is hearing it, the word inescapable is a fact to Zuko and a challenge to Sokka. It is the same shape as the shell that no earthbending could crack, a thing declared impossible to break by someone with reason to know. And we've already watched, one book earlier, what this particular mind does when it's handed something that cannot be broken by force. It does not throw itself against the shell, it goes looking for the schematic. It looks for the pressure point, the weak place inside the thing that its own designers did not think to defend. And it waits, patient and unbending, in the only way a non-bender can be, until it knows exactly where to press. Some minds mistake their own reach for wisdom, and Zhao is the show's cleanest study of that error. He is not stupid. That is the thing worth holding on to as this chapter unfolds. A stupid man could not have done what he does before the siege of the Northern Water Tribe. What undoes him is not a lack of thinking, but a surplus of certainty. A mind clever enough to find the answer, and too proud to ask whether the answer should be used at all. Consider the way he speaks before the invasion begins. He tells Iroh that the coming siege will truly be one for the history books. He imagines a future in which people, centuries from now, study his name, the great Admiral Zhao, who destroyed the last of the Water Tribe civilization. Listen to the shape of that sentence. It is a man narrating his own legend before the events have happened, arranging his place in the record as though history were a wall he had already been given permission to carve. There is a smallness inside the grandeur of it. He does not want to win the battle so much as he wants to be remembered for winning it. And those are not the same desire, though a certain kind of ego cannot tell them apart. Iroh answers him softly, and the answer is one of the most precise warnings in the series. Be careful what you wish for, Admiral, he says. History is not always kind to its subjects. Think about what that line does in the moment. It does not argue, it does not threaten. It simply points out that the record Zhao is so eager to enter has a will of its own, that being remembered and being remembered well are two different fates, and that a man does not get to choose which one he receives. Zhao brushes it aside. Of course he does. To take the warning seriously, he would have to imagine himself as the subject of history rather than its author, and that is precisely the imaginative act his ego cannot perform. Then he does something that, on a second viewing, tells you almost everything. He mocks Iroh's own defeat. He says the coming battle will be nothing like Iroh's legendary failure at Ba Sing Se. Sit with the choice, for a moment, of every person in that room. Iroh is the one who has actually stood at the gates of a great siege and watched it fail. He is the living archive of exactly the outcome Zhao is trying to avoid. And Zhao, given that resource, given a man who has felt the weight of a defeat that entered the history books in a way no one would envy, chooses to needle him for it rather than learn from it. The wisdom is right there in the room, offered freely, and Zhao treats it as a target for a jab. That is hubris in its working form. It is not merely overconfidence. It is the active conversion of available wisdom into an occasion for contempt. The plan itself grows out of the same soil. Zhao explains to Iroh that he means to remove the moon as a factor before the full moon rises, because under a full moon the waterbenders of the north would be undefeatable. On its own, this is sound military reasoning. He has correctly identified the single condition that would make his enemy impossible to beat, and he intends to neutralize it. This is the part people forget when they reduce him to a fool. The reading of the battlefield is remarkably sharp. The horror is not in the diagnosis. It is in the treatment he is willing to reach for, because the way he proposes to remove the moon is to kill the moon spirit itself. And here the chapter turns from ambition to something colder, because Zhao tells Iroh how he came to believe such a thing was even possible. Years earlier, he says, as a young lieutenant, serving somewhere in the Earth Kingdom, he found a hidden underground library, and in it, a scroll that illustrated and named the moon and ocean spirits. From that discovery, he drew a single conclusion. These spirits, he decided, could be found and killed. Follow the logic, because the logic is the whole tragedy. A name and a picture to Zhao are proof of mortality. To know a thing's identity is in his mind, to hold power over it. He does not consider that some forces might be named and pictured and still remain entirely beyond his hand. Knowledge, for him, is always a lever. It never occurs to him that some knowledge is meant to teach humility rather than grant control. And then he does the thing that seals the reading. He frames the killing as destiny, after describing how he uncovered the spirit's immortal identities. He says it was his destiny to do so. This is the ego completing its circuit. What began as a clever discovery in an old library becomes, in his telling, a fate he was chosen to fulfill. Notice how convenient that is. Destiny asks no permission and admits no doubt. By calling it destiny, Zhao removes the one question a wiser man would sit with, which is whether he ought to do this at all. He has dressed an act of enormous arrogance in the robes of cosmic appointment, and to himself it looks like reverence. Iroh warns him again, and this time there is no diplomacy left in it. Zhao, the spirits are not to be trifled with, he says. It is a plain sentence, almost blunt. It's the kind of warning you give when subtlety has already failed. Zhao dismisses it as fear. He treats Iroh's caution as a weakness of nerve rather than a report from experience, which is the same mistake he made about Ba Sing Se. Only now, the stakes have grown beyond armies. And here the story hands us the detail that removes any defence of ignorance. Zhao acknowledges in that very exchange that he has heard rumours of Iroh's own journey into the spirit world. He knows. He knows that the man warning him has crossed into that other place and returned. He knows the spirits are real and dangerous and are not the kind of thing a scroll fully contains. And he proceeds anyway. This is the crucial distinction between a mistake and hubris. A mistake is made in the dark. Zhao makes his choice in full light, with a witness beside him whose lived knowledge he has decided to outrank. His justification, when he offers it, is almost breathtaking in its confidence. The ocean and moon spirits, he argues, gave up their immortality to become a part of our world, and now they will face the consequences. Turn that sentence over. He has taken beings that a wiser mind would treat as forces to be respected and reduced them to defendants, awaiting sentence. Their choice to enter the physical world, to become vulnerable, becomes in his framing a legal liability, an exposure he is entitled to exploit. He speaks of consequences as though he were the appointed instrument of them. He is not weighing whether a mortal ought to strike at the moon. He has already appointed himself the one who gets to decide that they must. And this is where the chapter can rest, because the pattern is now fully visible, and it is a pattern of thought rather than a single act. Every step Zhao takes is intelligent. The reading of the moon, the recovery of the scroll, the identification of the spirit's weakness, all of it is the work of a capable mind. What poisons the whole sequence is the ego that sits on top of it, the certainty that cleverness is the same as permission, that knowing how is the same as knowing whether. Iroh keeps offering him the missing piece, and Zhao keeps mistaking it for fear. He wanted the history books. He was told to his face that history is not always kind to its subjects, and he walked toward the moon, believing the warning was beneath him. Consider what a city has to become before a single outsider can walk its streets and be handled. When the group first meets the woman, who calls herself Judy, she greets them not as guests, but as a task she has been assigned. She says she has been given the great honour of showing the avatar around Ba Sing Se, and she describes the Dai Li as the cultural authority of the city, the guardians of all its traditions. Listen to the shape of those words. They are gentle, official, almost hospitable, and they are a wall. Beneath the courtesy is a machine that has already decided what these travellers are permitted to see, hear, and ask. The genius of that machine before Azula ever touches it, lies in how it converts urgency into paperwork. Sokka insists the group must speak to the Earth King at once because they carry intelligence about a Fire Nation army movement that could decide the war. Judy does not argue. She does not deny the danger. She simply continues the tour and later informs them that their request for an audience is being processed and should be put through in about a month. Think about what that does to a person. There's no villain to fight, no lie to expose, only a smiling delay that turns a matter of life and death into a scheduling inconvenience. The war does not exist inside these walls because the city has decided it does not exist, and the decision is enforced by politeness. Then there is the detail that reveals the whole system. The moment the first Judy fails, after she cannot stop the group from covering the city with posters searching for Appa, she vanishes. In her place stands a different woman, a different face, a different body, who introduces herself with the same 2 syllables and the same untroubled smile. Judy. The name is not a name. It is a role, a costume that can be worn by anyone. The city needs to wear it, and the substitution is performed so smoothly that the group is expected to simply accept it. The person is disposable. The function is permanent. That is what a controlled city looks like from the inside, and the show shows it to you without a single raised voice. Behind that substitution is a scene of quiet accounting. An unseen superior speaks to the first Judy and tells her he is very disappointed in her work with the Avatar and his friends, that he had hoped she would be able to control this situation. It is the tone of a manager reviewing a failed project, not a warlord condemning a traitor. When she says she can no longer keep working like this, he does not rage. He tells her to go to Lake Laogai and await further orders. The Avatar Wiki confirms what the framing implies, that this office belongs to Long Feng, and that the ambassadors, who all answer to the name Judy, are brainwashed, dropped into compliance by a trigger phrase spoken in the same soft register as everything else in the city. The Earth King has invited you to Lake Laogai. Those words, later used on the freedom fighter jet as well, collapse a person into obedience. Control here is not chains. It is a sentence, and the person hears it as an honour. What matters most for understanding Azula is how Long Feng thinks about threat, because his instinct will become the crack she pries open. He warns that if Aang keeps searching for Appa, it could upset the delicate balance the Dai Li worked so hard to achieve in the city, that it could even cost them control of the Earth King. And when he is asked whether they should take care of the Avatar directly, his answer is no. It is much too dangerous to confront him directly. He would rather see if the situation can still be handled without noise. This is a careful man, a man whose entire power rests on nothing ever being seen. His strength is invisibility, and invisibility, once someone understands it, is also a limit. Long Feng cannot afford noise. That is the pressure point. Now hold that portrait of Long Feng in your mind, the master of the quiet, and set beside it the person who takes his instruments away from him. Azula does not build this machine. She does not brainwash the ambassadors, or design the trigger phrases, or spend years cultivating the balance he protects. She arrives, she reads what already exists, and she recognises that the most valuable thing in Ba Sing Se is not the Earth King, and not the army. It is the Dai Li themselves. She says as much to an unseen listener, that they are in the perfect position to organise a coup and overthrow the Earth King, that the key is the Dai Li. that she wants to make a deal. Notice the economy of that assessment. Others in her position might have reached for the throne or the walls. She reaches for the men who stand behind both, because whoever holds the Dai Li holds everything they hold. The prior tellings of this story tend to treat the coup as a moment Azula wins the city. Watch it instead as a lesson in persuasion, because the way she turns the Dai Li is not force, it is fear, aimed with precision. Standing before the assembled agents, she tells them that the Earth King and the Council of Five do not trust the Dai Li, that they have imprisoned their leader, Long Feng, and that soon they will turn on all of them and eliminate them. Study the structure of that argument. She does not ask the Dai Li to betray anyone. She tells them they have already been betrayed, that the knife is already at their backs, and that she is merely the one pointing it out. Long Feng ruled them by convincing them the city needed them. Azula rules them by convincing them the city intends to destroy them. The first is loyalty, the second is survival, and survival is the more reliable master. Then she gives them the plan, and the plan itself is a piece of tactical thinking worth pausing on. She tells them that seizing power today is a matter of life and death, that the coup must be swift and decisive, that the Earth King and each of the 5 generals must be taken out simultaneously. That final word is the whole doctrine. Simultaneously, she understands that a government is not toppled by removing its head, because a head can call for help, rally its generals, mount a defence. It is toppled by removing every point of resistance in the same instant, so that no one is left standing to react. There is no sequence for the enemy to interrupt, no gap in which alarm can spread. It is the logic of a single strike rather than a war, and it is the opposite of Long Feng's slow, invisible management, where he handled things quietly over years. She ends them in an afternoon, and she does it wearing his authority. She tells the Dai Li that Long Feng has placed them in her command while they overthrow the government. Whether that is entirely true, or a claim she has arranged to be true, the effect is the same. She does not ask the agents to abandon their chain of command. She inserts herself at the top of it, so that following her feels like following orders rather than defecting. And she seals it with a warning that if she senses any disloyalty, any hesitation, any weakness at all, she will snuff it out. Consider how complete that is. She has offered them survival if they obey, and destruction if they falter. And she has left no third path, no room to wait and see. The men who spent years making other people compliant are, in the span of one speech, made compliant themselves by someone who arrived with none of the tools and simply understood them better than they understood each other. The show is generous enough to puncture the moment, and the puncture tells you how to read what you just watched. As soon as Azula finishes, Dai Li says in effect that it was a nice speech, pretty and poetic, but also scary in a good way. Mai adds that she thought Azula was going to make one of the agents lose control of himself entirely. It is a small, almost comic exchange, and it does something important. It frames the speech as a performance, a crafted object, admired by the 2 people who know Azula best precisely for its effect on a room. They are not commenting on the truth of what she said, because the truth was never the point. They are commenting on the engineering of it, the way the words were built to land. That is the register in which Azula operates. Long Feng controlled a city by making sure it never noticed it was controlled. Azula walks into his city, borrows his agents and controls them out loud. And the only review that follows is her friends telling her the speech was good. Power can buy a certain blindness for itself. An avatar. The Last Airbender spends much of its second season building a careful portrait of it. The blindness belongs to Earth King Kuei, a ruler who sits at the centre of the largest city in his world and knows almost nothing about the war that has defined his world for a century. Kuei is voiced, by most accounts, by Phil Lamar, and the performance is worth listening to closely, because it is a study in gentleness that has never once been tested. This is a man who has never had to be suspicious of anyone. The story of his ignorance is not really the story of a foolish king. It is the story of a system built patiently and expensively to keep one man from ever learning the truth. And it begins long before he appears on screen. When Aang and his friends first arrive with urgent information about the Fire Nation army massing beyond the walls, they are assigned a guide named Zhu Di. And the first thing to understand about the city of Ba Sing Se is what happens next. Zhu Di does not take their information. She does not pass it upward. Instead, she begins a scripted tour of the city, and to their fear and their urgency, she offers a single reassurance that everyone is safe here. Think about the design of that response. A group arrives with the news of an approaching army, and the machinery of the city answers not with alarm, but with tourism. The urgency is not argued with. It is simply absorbed, redirected, smoothed over, as though the very concept of an emergency were a small breach of etiquette that a good hostess could correct. The request for an audience with the Earth King receives the same treatment, dressed in the language of bureaucracy. Zhu Di tells them the request is being processed and that it should be granted in about a month, a timeline she describes, without irony, as much more quickly than usual. Here is the quiet genius of the obstruction. Nobody says no, nobody forbids the meeting. The king is not hidden behind a wall of refusal, but behind a wall of process, and process cannot be argued with the way a person can. You cannot break down a schedule. You cannot demand that a queue move faster on the grounds that lives are at stake, because the queue does not acknowledge that lives are at stake. It only acknowledges its own order. A month, she says, and calls it fast, and in doing so, she makes the delay sound like a courtesy. The structure keeping the king unreachable has a name, and Zhu Di gives it to them in the softest possible terms. The Dai Li, she explains, are the cultural authority of Ba Sing Se, the guardians of all their traditions, and they are stationed at the wall around the royal palace. Listen to the vocabulary. Not as secret police, not enforcers, not the king's jailers, but guardians of tradition, a phrase that turns surveillance into heritage. And when the group presses toward the palace anyway, she offers the line that closes the door with a smile, that one does not just pop in on the Earth King. The phrasing is almost playful. It treats the desire to warn a ruler of an invasion as a kind of social gaffe, the way one might gently correct a guest who reached for the wrong fork. The king is not defended by soldiers in this moment. He is defended by manners. What makes the second season so unnerving is that this is not merely inefficiency, it is policy, deliberate and enforced, and the show states it plainly. It is the strict policy of the city that the war not be mentioned within the walls. Zhu Di insists that there is no war within the walls, that here they are safe. Sit with the strangeness of that sentence. It does not claim the war will be won, or that the walls will hold. It claims, in effect, that the war does not exist inside the city, as though a fact could be evicted at the gate, along with unwanted visitors. This is where the king's ignorance stops being an accident of distance and becomes something manufactured. If the word itself is forbidden, then a ruler could live his entire life surrounded by loyal servants and never once hear the thing they have all agreed not to say. The people who say it too loudly do not stay. One of the coldest small strokes in the series. The original Zhu Di is swapped without comment for an identical replacement. A different woman who introduces herself with the same name and the same fixed smile, explaining that the first Zhu Di has taken a short vacation to Lake Laogai. The group is meant to notice and to understand that they are not meant to be able to prove anything. The name is not a name. It is a role, a costume that can be worn by anyone, and the person inside it is disposable. What happened to the first Zhu Di is left in the gap between her cheerful account and the flat wrongness of the substitution, and the show trusts you to feel the temperature drop. We are given one glimpse behind the smile, and it tells us exactly what the whole apparatus is protecting. An unseen superior speaks to Zhu Di, telling her she has failed to control the Avatar's group, and issuing a warning that reveals the true stakes. If Aang keeps searching for his lost sky bison, the voice says it could even cost them control of the Earth King. And then it orders her to Lake Laogai. Notice what the fear is. It is not the loss of a battle, or a district, or a wall. It is the loss of control of the king himself. The king, in this telling, is not the master the Dai Li serve. He is the asset they hold. His ignorance is not a weakness they tolerate. It is the thing they exist to maintain, the crown jewel of the whole operation. And everything else, the tours, the schedules, the vanishing guides, is in service of keeping that one man asleep. The man who runs this machine is Long Feng, and when he finally confronts Aang directly, he says the quiet truth aloud, that the Earth King has no time to get involved with political squabbles. Consider the word squabbles. 100 years of war, the fall of nations, the near extinction of an entire people, all of it filed under petty disputes beneath the king's attention. It is Sokka who names the arrangement for what it is, calling the king just a figurehead, Long Feng's puppet. And the terrible thing is that in this moment Sokka is right. The king they are fighting to reach has been so thoroughly managed that he functions as an ornament on a throne, present but not governing, sovereign in name over a city that his own minister actually rules. When Team Avatar finally forces their way into the throne room, the show refuses to give them the easy reward of a grateful king. Quay does not thank them. He sides with Long Feng, and he orders that Aang and his companions never see daylight again, calling them enemies of the state. This is the payoff of the whole long deception, and it is a bleak one. The people who broke every rule to bring him the truth are, from inside his sealed world, exactly what they appear to be: intruders and criminals. He's been so completely surrounded by Long Feng's version of reality that loyalty and betrayal have been inverted for him. The liar stands at his side as a trusted advisor, and the truth stands before him as a threat to be imprisoned. The lie itself is small and specific, and that is what makes it land. Long Feng tells the king, to his face, that he has never even seen a sky bison, adding that, frankly, he thought they were extinct. It is a flat, deliberate falsehood, and for a moment the king believes it, over Aang's word, because of course he does. Kuei has no reason yet to trust the strange boy over the man who has served him for years. The whole tragedy of his position is compressed into that choice. He's not stupid to believe Long Feng. He's simply doing what his entire sealed life has trained him to do, which is to trust the familiar voice and doubt the disruptive one. Then Aang says the thing that no one is allowed to say inside those walls. He tells the king that there is a war going on right now, and has been for the past 100 years, and that the Dai Li have kept it secret from him. Watch the king's reaction, because it is the hinge of the entire chapter. A secret war, he says, that's crazy. And here, for the first time, we see the ignorance from the inside. The king is not lying when he calls the idea absurd. To him it genuinely is absurd, because a century of careful policy has made the truth sound like a fantasy, and the fantasy sound like the truth. His disbelief is not stubbornness. It is the natural response of a mind that has been fed a smaller, safer world and never given a reason to doubt it. What finally cracks the shell is almost comically physical, and the show is wise to make it so. Long Feng's lie about never having seen a sky bison is disproven on screen when Appa's bite mark is found on his leg, and Long Feng, cornered, claims unconvincingly that it is a large birthmark. The abstraction of the war, the century of suffering, the vast invisible conspiracy, none of it is what breaks through. The toothmark does. It is a small, absurd, undeniable object in a room full of words, and words are exactly what the king has been drowning in for his whole reign. The birthmark excuse is so feeble that even a man as sheltered as Kuei can see through it, and in seeing through it, he takes his first real step out of the world that was built for him. And yet the show cannot resist one last note about how thin the thread of truth really is. The reason the king agrees to listen at all, the stated reason, is not the logic of Aang's argument or the weight of the evidence. It is his pet bear, Bosco. Though Bosco seems to like him, the king says, and on that basis alone, he decides he will hear what the boy has to say. Weigh that for a moment. The fate of the largest city in the world, the question of whether its ruler will finally learn of the war being waged around him, turns on the mood of an animal. It is funny, and it is also quietly devastating, because it shows how little Kuei has ever had to rely on his own judgment. He has been kept so far from consequence that even now, at the edge of the truth, he reaches not for reason, but for the simple instinct of whether his bear approves. The door opens, but it opens by accident, and only by a hair. Consider the walk toward the Earth King's palace, and what it costs Iroh to make it. He and Zuko approach the palace, not as invaders, but as invited guests, tea servers, welcomed through the gates because of the quality of a pot of tea. And it is here that Iroh says something that lingers longer than its lightness suggests. Destiny is a funny thing, he tells his nephew, and he admits that he had always pictured himself arriving at this place as a conqueror. Think about what it means for a man to say that out loud. He is naming the version of himself that wanted the city by force, and setting it beside the version that has arrived instead with humility and a tray. The Dragon of the West, the general, whose reputation once frightened a continent, walks in through the front door because he was gracious to strangers. There's a small moment on that same journey that tells you almost everything about how this man teaches. Iroh begins to explain how he earned that famous nickname, and then he stops himself. It is more of a demonstration, really, he says, and rather than finish the story, he simply tells Zuko to come with him. A lesser storyteller and a lesser mentor would have delivered the legend in full. Iroh withholds it. He understands that some things are not transmitted through words, that a boy who has been told 1,000 corrections will absorb almost none of them, and that showing is a different act than telling. This is patience of a particular kind. It is the patience to leave a sentence unfinished, because the moment for finishing it has not yet come. That patience is the through line of everything Iroh does in this chapter, and it is worth separating from the thing people usually notice about him, which is his power. The show gives Iroh formidable firebending, and it earns him a name built around a dragon. But the intelligence the finale asks you to watch is not the intelligence of the flame. It is the intelligence of reading people, of timing, of knowing when to hold back and when to move. Iroh does not win by being the strongest bender in the room. He wins when he wins by understanding the room. You can see the contrast most clearly when you set him beside Zuko in the same stretch of story. Zuko reaches a breaking point and declares that he is tired of running, that it is time he faced Azula, and he challenges her to an Agni Kai, the formal fire duel that is supposed to settle things between two benders. It is a declaration full of feeling, full of the exhaustion of a boy who has been fleeing his own family and his own choices for a very long time. And Azula simply refuses. She calls him so dramatic, mocks the theatre of the gesture, and tells him no thanks. The duel he stakes his dignity on never happens because she denies him the frame he needs. Zuko understands combat. What he does not yet understand is that his sister will not fight on his terms, and that offering her a fair fight is offering her a gift she has no reason to accept. Iroh, watching a nephew learn this the hard way, does not step in front of the lesson. He lets Zuko make the mistake of assuming his opponent shares his code. This is the harder face of Iroh's patience, and I think it is the one that makes him genuinely wise, rather than merely kind. A mentor who loves someone is always tempted to spare them their errors. Iroh, again and again, declines that temptation. He lets Zuko arrive at his own conclusions, even painful ones, because he seems to grasp that a person who is handed the answer does not truly own it. The Agni Kai that Azula waves away is not a scene Iroh scripts or prevents. It is Zuko walking into a wall so that the shape of the wall becomes real to him. Iroh is not infallible, and the finale is honest enough to show it. When he tries to reassure Aang that Katara is safe, he reaches for the wrong evidence. He points to Bosco, the Earth King's bear, and argues that the animal's instinct would sense any real danger. The reassurance is comforting, and it is wrong. Katara is in fact in trouble, and the calm certainty in Iroh's voice does not make her less so. I find this a small but important beat. The show could have made Iroh a flawless oracle, a man whose foresight never misfires. Instead, it lets him be confident and mistaken in the same breath, which keeps his wisdom human. Foresight is not omniscience. It is a habit of thinking ahead, that improves your odds, not a guarantee that you have read the board correctly. And yet watch what he does. When the danger becomes undeniable, Iroh arrives, unannounced, at the apartment where Aang and the others are staying, and he says plainly that he needs their help. He reveals that Princess Azula is in Ba Sing Se, and that she has captured his nephew Zuko. Sit with a strategic reading of this. Iroh, a former general of the enemy nation, an old man alone in a hostile city, does not try to rescue Zuko by force. He calculates that his best chance lies in alliance with the very people who have every reason to distrust him. And he goes to them and asks. That is not weakness dressed up as diplomacy. It is a clear-eyed assessment of what a single fighter, however skilled, can and cannot do against Azula and the Dai Li. The emotional intelligence and the strategic intelligence turn out to be the same faculty. When Katara resists helping Zuko, and she has good reason to resist him, Iroh does not argue tactics with her. He speaks to the feeling directly. He tells her that he knows how she must feel about his nephew, and then he asks her to believe him when he says there is good inside him. He does not deny her anger. He acknowledges it first and only then makes his case. And once Katara agrees that working together is their best chance, Iroh names the alliance out loud. Then they will work together to fight Azula and save Katara and Zuko. He builds the coalition the way he read the palace, by attending to the person in front of him before he attends to the plan. Then he does the thing a general does. Iroh brings Team Avatar, a captured Dai Li agent, and the agent gives up what they need to know. Azula and Long Feng are plotting a coup against the Earth King, and Katara is being held in the crystal catacombs beneath the palace. The old man who arrived asking for help has quietly delivered intelligence, an alliance, and a target. He has turned a scattered group of frightened people into a coordinated force. And he has done it without throwing a single flame. All of this belongs to the finale of the second book, the episode called The Crossroads of Destiny, written by Aaron Ahash and credited to the directing team behind that stretch of the series, which first aired on the 1st of December 2006. Is the episode where destiny stops being an abstraction and becomes a set of choices made under pressure. Iroh's choices across this chapter are choices of restraint. He withholds the story of the dragon. He lets his nephew fail. He asks for help instead of demanding it. And he reads the people around him more carefully than he reads any strategy. Because for Iroh, the two have never been separate things. Some foolishness does not look like foolishness at all. It wears a uniform. It speaks in the confident cadence of a man who has read the reports and drawn the obvious conclusion. General Fong, when we meet him, is not a fool in any way that announces itself, and that's precisely what makes his stretch of the story worth sitting with on a quiet night. He is the intelligent-sounding mistake. He is what happens when a single idea takes hold of a competent mind and squeezes out everything else. But to understand why his reasoning lands the way it does, we have to begin a little earlier, back at the top of the world, in the cold, before the base and the general and the plan. Aang carries something out of the North Pole that he does not fully name. He tells Katara he has had a nightmare. In it he was in the Avatar state, that surge of borrowed power that has already more than once done things his waking self would never choose. And the detail he gives her is the unsettling one. he was watching himself from outside his own body. He admits plainly that it was scary. Hold on to that image, because it is the quiet counter-argument to everything Fong is about to propose. The boy has already glimpsed what it feels like to be a passenger inside his own power, to be present and absent at once, and he did not like it. The parting from the north is measured, careful, the way a good teacher makes it. Master Pakku gives Katara an amulet, and he is specific about what it holds. Water from the Spirit Oasis, which he calls a container of unique properties, and he tells her not to lose it. There's a whole ethic folded into that small gesture. Something rare, entrusted to a person he trusts to keep it. And to Aang, he gives water-bending scrolls, but with them a warning that will echo through this entire stretch of the journey. There is no substitute, Pakku says, for a real master. Consider how much of what follows is a variation on that single sentence. A scroll is not a teacher. A shortcut is not the path. Power without guidance is not the same as skill. So the plan is set, and it is a patient one. Katara tells Aang where to fly to an Earth Kingdom base east of the North Pole, where General Fong will provide an escort onward to Amashu. And in Amashu waits King Bumi, who is meant to begin Aang's Earthbending training. Notice the shape of that intention. Aang is going to the general not to fight, but to be passed along safely toward the next teacher and the next element. The base is a waypoint. It is supposed to be nothing more than that. The friends arrive, expecting a courtesy, an escort, a night's rest and a road out. What they find instead is flattery, and flattery is often the first sign that someone wants something from you. Fong greets the group warmly, and the warmth is aimed carefully. He calls Sokka, brave Sokka. He calls Katara, the mighty Katara. And Sokka, being Sokka, cheerfully admits he likes the sound of that. It is a small, funny beat, and it is easy to let it pass, but it tells you what kind of man Fong is. He knows how to make people feel seen. He knows the value of a title dropped at the right moment. This is not a stupid man. This is a persuasive one. And persuasion is stupidity's most flattering disguise. Then comes the pivot, and it arrives fast. Fong looks at Aang and tells him he is ready to face the Fire Lord now. His evidence is a story. He has heard that Aang single-handedly wiped out an entire Fire Navy fleet at the North Pole. And to Fong, that is proof, clean and sufficient, of the boy's power. Sit with the logic there, because it is the whole trap in miniature. Fong has heard about the fleet. He has not, we understand, heard about the boy watching himself from outside his own body. Terrified, unable to steer, he has taken the results and mistaken it for a skill. He has seen the flood and concluded that the child controls the tide. Katara objects on the spot, and she is right, and it matters that she is the one who is right. She tells Fong that Aang still needs to master all four elements before he can face the Fire Lord. This is not timidity, it is the plan, the real plan, the patient one that Pakku's warning was built to protect. And Aang, to his credit, tells Fong the plain truth about the very power the general is counting on. He does not know how to get into the Avatar state. He does not know how to get out of it. He does not know what to do once he is inside it. Read that admission slowly. It is a boy handing a commander every reason in the world to stop. And Fong hears it and responds by declaring that he will personally help Aang figure out how to trigger it. The confession that should have ended the plan becomes, in Fong's mind, the plan's next step. That is tunnel vision. The obstacle is simply reclassified as a task. There is a moment in the stretch that I find especially hard to shake, and it is the walk through the infirmary. Fong leads Aang through the base, past the wounded soldiers, lying there, and he tells the boy that these men are the lucky ones because they came back. He is using the war's own casualties as an argument. He is turning the broken bodies of his soldiers into leverage on a child. And here is where the intelligence and the stupidity become impossible to separate, because it is, in a cold way, effective. Every one of those beds is real. The suffering is not invented. Fong is not lying. He is simply pointing at true pain and pulling from it exactly one conclusion, the conclusion he had already reached before they arrived. Act now. Do not wait for mastery. Do not wait for Bumi or Earthbending or the slow accumulation of skill that Paku said cannot be replaced. Every day you spend learning, more beds fill. It is the argument of a man who has stopped being able to imagine that his shortcut might be worse than the wait. Aang's first answer is the correct one, and he gives it alongside Katara. He refuses. Nothing is decided, he tells Fong. They already have a plan. He's going to pursue his destiny, his own way, which is to say, the slow way, the way with teachers in it. For a moment, the two children hold the line together against a grown commander in his own fortress, and the scene seems settled. And then Aang changes his mind privately away from Katara. He goes to Fong and tells him he is in, that he will fight the Fire Lord, agreeing to let the general help him force his way into the Avatar state. This is the hinge of the whole chapter, and I want to be careful not to make it into something simpler than it is. Aang does not reverse himself, because Fong out-argued him on the merits. He reverses himself because of the infirmary, because of the beds, because a frightened, decent boy has been made to feel that his patience is being paid for in other people's blood. Fong did not win the debate. He found the pressure point. That is the difference between persuasion and manipulation, and Fong, whether he knows it or not, has crossed it. When Katara finds out, she confronts Aang directly, and her words are simple. This is not the right way. There's no long speech, no elaborate case. She has already made the argument back when Fong first proposed it, and she does not need to make it again. She just names the truth she can see, and he has talked himself out of seeing. And Sokka, standing at the edge of it, does what Sokka does, which is to puncture the whole thing with sarcasm. He tells them in effect to just glow it up and stop the Fire Lord, and then he calls them meatheads for abandoning their training plan. It is played for a laugh, and it earns one. But listen to what is actually inside the joke. Sokka, the one without bending, the one who is supposed to be the least wise of the three about spiritual matters, has correctly identified that they are throwing away the plan. The comic relief is holding the same position as Katara and the same position as Paku's warning. The scroll is not the master. The shortcut is not the path. What makes Fong a portrait rather than just a villain is that he never sees any of this. He does not see the nightmare. He does not weigh Aang's confession that he cannot control the very state he is being pushed toward. He does not register Katara's objection as anything but an obstacle, or Sokka's sarcasm as anything at all. He has one idea, and the idea is that the Avatar is a weapon that is already loaded and simply needs firing. Everything that contradicts that idea. The boy's fear, the boy's ignorance of his own power, the careful plan built by the people who actually love him, gets filtered out on the way in. That is the stupidity, and it is not the stupidity of a weak mind. It is the stupidity of a strong mind that has stopped listening. He is proof that being clever and being wise are not the same thing, and that a war can make a competent man dangerous precisely by giving him a reason to stop asking whether he might be wrong. The tragedy sitting just under this chapter is that Aang knew better first. He said no. He and Katara said no together. And then the beds, and the guilt, and a general who understood exactly which string to pull moved a boy off the path his own teachers had marked for him. We leave him here, and having said the words I'm in, standing between a friend who told him this is not the right way, and a commander who is already certain it is. Consider the problem Bumi faces and how long he has been facing it. When Aang arrives at Omashu in the first season, he arrives as a boy who last saw the place a lifetime ago, and he tells Katara and Sokka just before they walk through the gates that this is the city where he used to visit his old friend Bumi. That single line carries more weight than it seems to at first. It means the friendship is old, older than the war, and it means that the two of them come from a world that no longer exists. Aang has skipped over the century that changed everything. Bumi has lived through all of it, and the version of Bumi that Aang is about to meet has spent that entire span becoming something Aang does not expect and does not, for most of this episode, even recognise. Aang enters the city in disguise. He wears an itchy false moustache and a false beard, and shuffles in as an old man, hiding the fact that he is the Avatar so that no one will know him. Hold on to that image, because it is quietly the theme of the whole chapter. Aang puts on the mask of an old man to conceal who he really is. And inside the city, an actual old man, or a man who looks elderly, will do the same thing in reverse, wearing frailty and foolishness over a mind that is perfectly sharp. The disguises mirror each other. The boy pretends to be old and harmless. The king pretends to be old and mad. Both are performances, and only one of them is being performed by a master. The first thing Bumi does, before he reveals anything, is guide the three of them through Omashu's mail delivery chutes. These are the earth-bent tubes that run through the city, a delivery system where Earthbending sends packages up along the stone and gravity carries them back down. It is an ordinary piece of civic infrastructure, the plumbing of a working city. And Bumi, still disguised as an old guide, takes this ordinary system and turns it into a slide. He rides it for pleasure, for the sheer joy of it, and he tells Aang something that functions as the key to his entire character. Instead of seeing what they want you to see, he says, you have to open your brain to the possibilities. Those are his words, and they are worth sitting with. The delivery chute is what the city wants you to see. The slide is a possibility. The gap between those two things is where Bumi lives. Aang responds by calling him a mad genius, and that phrase is the hinge the whole chapter turns on. Mad genius. The two words are held together in tension. Aang says them as a compliment, half laughing, the way you might describe a brilliant eccentric. But look at the order of the two words, and look at which one the world actually sees. Everyone in Omashu, and everyone watching, registers the madness first. The genius hides underneath it and it hides so well that it can operate in plain sight. A man who slides down the mail chutes looks like a man who has lost his grip. He does not look like a strategist. That's precisely the cover he wants. The consequences of the slide arrive quickly and comically. The ride wrecks a cabbage merchant's cart, and the three of them are arrested and charged, as fans generally recall it, with vandalism, with some kind of deception, and with destroying cabbages. It is a small, absurd list of crimes, and it lands them in front of a judge. The judge is Bumi. He presides over the case wearing a visibly crooked crown, and Aang still does not recognise him. Sit with the crown for a moment. A crown sitting crooked on a king's head is the kind of detail that reads instantly as carelessness, as decay, as a ruler who can no longer keep himself straight. It is the visual shorthand for a fool on a throne. And yet this is the same man who, moments earlier, articulated a philosophy of seeing past appearances. The crooked crown is another mask. When a guard calls for the group to be executed, the Mad King overrules him and sentences them instead to a feast. The reversal is played for laughs, the swing from death to dinner. But underneath the comedy, something careful is happening. Bumi is protecting Aang while pretending to be too unhinged to be doing anything so deliberate. Then he drops the pretense, at least partway. Bumi reveals that he already knows Aang as the Avatar. He has known, presumably, since before the trial, perhaps since before the shoots. The whole sequence of the guide, and the slide, and the courtroom was arranged by a man who was fully aware of exactly who his old friend was, and had decided to test him rather than simply greet him. Bumi declares that Aang will face 3 challenges the next day, and he has the group locked away in a chamber he describes as newly refurbished, which is his way of turning a prison into a joke, and a joke into a prison at the same time. Everything he does operates on 2 levels. The surface is play. The layer beneath it is intention. And the reason this matters, the reason it is worth dwelling on before we move forward in time, is that it establishes the pattern by which Bumi should be read. When Bumi appears to be doing nothing but goofing, he is almost always doing something precise. The madness is the delivery mechanism for the genius. Now carry that pattern forward, across the gap between the first season and the second, to a moment that is not funny at all. When Aang returns to Omashu, the city has been occupied by the Fire Nation. It is no longer his friend's strange kingdom. It is enemy ground. And Aang tells Katara, plainly, that he is going in to find Bumi. This is not about finding a teacher, he says. This is about finding my friend. He refuses to leave until he does. The line matters because it strips away the strategic reason Aang might have. He does not need Bumi, the Earthbending master, or does not only need that, he needs Bumi the person, the last living link to the world he lost. The old man, from before the war. The friendship that Aang named in a single sentence at the very start has become the thing he will not abandon. And what he learns when he starts asking reframes everything the first encounter taught us. A resistance fighter tells Aang what happened on the day the Fire Nation invaded. King Bumi, who could bend the very stones the city is made of, who turned delivery chutes into slides with a thought, chose to surrender Omashu. He gave it up, and when he was asked what he wanted to do, he answered that he was going to do nothing. Weigh that, coming from this man. This is the mad genius, the one who told a child to open his brain to the possibilities, and his chosen response to the invasion of his own kingdom is to do nothing at all. On its surface, it looks like the final collapse of the fool, a king so far gone that he will not even fight for his throne. It looks like the madness winning, but the whole of the first encounter had trained us to distrust that surface. We have watched this man wear frailty as a costume, wear a crooked crown as a decoy, wear the word mad as camouflage over the word genius. So when he says he is going to do nothing, the pattern insists that we ask what the nothing is for. Doing nothing, from a man of Bumi's capability, is not the same as being unable to act. It is a choice, and a choice made by someone who has just told the world, in effect, that he is opting out. A man who slides down mail chutes for fun does not surrender a city because he has given up. There is a longer game in the word nothing, a patience that looks, from the outside, exactly like defeat. That is the disguise operating at the largest possible scale. The performance of madness let him protect Aang in a courtroom. The performance of doing nothing lets him wait. What the city does in his absence is worth setting beside his stillness, because it shows the ordinary version of the same intelligence. The resistance fighters want to keep fighting, and Sokka persuades them instead to evacuate, to leave, rather than throw themselves against an occupying force they cannot beat. That is the sane, practical version of choosing not to fight. The recognition that a losing battle is worth walking away from. And the way they walk away is itself a small act of seeing past what the enemy wants them to see. The group fakes an outbreak of an illness that does not exist, a thing they call pentapox, marking their faces to look diseased. And they use the fear of contagion to convince the Fire Nation soldiers to drive the supposedly infected citizens out of the city, rather than lock them up. The soldiers see plague. They do not see a plan. They see what they are shown, and they act on the surface of it. And the people escape through the gap between appearance and truth. It is Bumi's own lesson, carried out by children, while the king himself sits still and waits, doing his chosen nothing, holding a patience that only makes sense if you have learned to read the madness as a mask. One kind of unintelligence has nothing to do with schooling or strategy. And the Fire Nation teenagers on Ember Island exist to demonstrate it. It is the dumbness of a person who cannot see past the surface of their own life, who moves through the world assuming that whatever is in front of them must be exactly what it appears to be. Two boys, Chan and Ruon Jian, watch a group of strangers dominate a pickup volleyball game on the beach, and on the strength of that athletic display alone, they extend an invitation to a party. Think about what they are actually doing. They are selecting guests by how well someone spikes a ball, and they have no idea, none at all, who they have just welcomed. The comedy of the whole sequence depends on a single piece of information that the hosts do not possess. Chan and Ruon Jian tell the group to behave themselves, because, as they explain, some of the most important teenagers in the Fire Nation will be at the party. They say this to the actual prince and princess of the Fire Nation. Zuko and Azula are standing right there, the two people in the entire country more important than any teenager these boys could name. And the hosts cannot perceive it. There is no cleverness required to see royalty when royalty is speaking to you. Only attention, and attention is precisely what these characters lack. Their self-absorption is so complete that the most significant fact in the room is invisible to them. What makes this more than a simple joke is that the invisibility is partly engineered. Azula deliberately hides that she and Zuko are royalty. She keeps the crowd in the dark on purpose, and she later explains why, saying, in effect, that she wanted to see how people would treat them if they did not know who they were. That is a genuinely interesting instinct, and it sets Azula apart from the crowd she is studying. She is running an experiment. She wants to observe the ordinary social world from the inside, stripped of the deference she is used to. The trouble is that Azula, for all her intelligence in matters of tactics and power, turns out to be almost as blind as the people she is testing, only in a different direction. Consider what happens when she tries to flirt with Chan. She wants to attract him, and the tool she reaches for is the language of conquest. She tells him that the two of them will be the strongest couple in the entire world, that they will dominate the earth. Those are the words she uses. And Chan, who is vapid, but who at least understands the register of a beach party, is frightened away by the sheer over-intensity of it. Here is the emotional dumbness working from the other side. Azula can read a battlefield, but she cannot read the small, soft, unspoken rules of casual attraction. She approaches courtship the way she approaches a military campaign, and the mismatch is so total that the boy simply retreats. She has no register for lightness. The scene is often remembered as a moment of humiliation for a fearsome character, but I think the more precise reading is that it exposes a specific gap in her, a blindness to the ordinary that mirrors the crowd's blindness to the extraordinary. Dai Li moves through the same party and encounters the same failure of perception from a different angle. Multiple boys crowd around her, each of them expecting her to single him out as her favourite, as though her attention were a prize to be awarded. And the only question were which of them would receive it. Not one of them considers that she might not want to choose any of them. Their assumption is so uniform and so unexamined that Dai Li resolves it physically, beating them up simply to make them go away and leave her alone. The boys cannot conceive of a girl who is not there to be won, and so they learn the boundary, the only way their dumbness permits, through force. Then the episode turns the same instrument on the friendships themselves, and this is where the comedy sharpens into something closer to cruelty. Azula watches the attention Dai Li receives and snaps at her, telling her that boys only like her because she is easy. The word does its work. Dai Li is reduced to tears. And what is remarkable, what lifts this above ordinary meanness, is that Azula afterward admits the truth of it, that she said the thing because she was jealous. For a character defined by control, this is a rare crack of honesty. The girl who could see through everyone else's pretences turns out to have been driven by an envy she did not want to name. The emotional dumbness at the party is not only the vanity of strangers, it reaches into the people we are meant to take seriously, and it reveals that they too can be governed by feelings they barely understand until the feeling has already done its damage. Zuko completes the pattern. He watches another boy talking to Mai, and jealousy rises in him, exactly as it rose in his sister. And rather than name it or manage it, he starts a physical fight in the middle of the party. Chan, the host who could not recognise a prince, now recognised as a nuisance and throws Zuko out of his own celebration. There is a quiet symmetry to that. The boy, too obtuse to see royalty, ejects the royal, and he does it for the pettiest reason imaginable, because a guest is ruining the mood. Every character at this party is undone by the same limitation, the inability to see clearly what is right in front of them, whether it is a person's identity, a person's disinterest, or the true source of one's own anger. That is the strange achievement of putting these teenagers on a beach. They're shallow, and the show lets them be shallow, and in their shallowness, they hold up a mirror. The powerful people among them are not exempt, they simply fail to see in more sophisticated ways. At Earth Rumble 6, the arena belongs to spectacle before it belongs to skill. A wrestler who calls himself the Boulder moves through the early rounds the way the crowd wants him to, defeating an opponent named the Big Bad Hippo, and then another called Fire Nation Man. Each victory a performance of strength, each throw designed to be seen and cheered. This is Earthbending as muscle, as showmanship, as a loud assertion of force. And it is exactly the wrong lesson for the boy watching from the stands, because Aang has been told to look for something else entirely. Earlier, King Bumi had given him a piece of advice that sounds almost like a riddle. Aang needs an earthbending teacher, yes, but not just any master. He needs one who waits and listens before striking. Hold that phrase in your mind, because it runs against everything the show has taught us about Earth so far. Earth is the stubborn element, the immovable element, the one associated with meeting force head-on. To wait, to listen, to strike only after understanding. This is a stranger and quieter idea of what earthbending might be. Aang carries the riddle into the arena without yet knowing what its answer looks like. The answer is standing in the ring under a name meant to be dismissed. The reigning champion fights as the blind bandit, and the crowd does not take the blindness seriously. They assume it is a costume, a bit of theatre, a character trait invented to make the fights more dramatic. Listen to how the show frames their doubt. She cannot really be blind, they reason. It is just part of her character, right? The assumption is casual, and it is cruel in a way the crowd does not even notice, because it treats a real condition as a gimmick, a marketing choice, rather than a fact of a person's life. They have decided in advance that her blindness is a fiction, and so they cannot see the thing that is actually happening in front of them. What is actually happening is a complete inversion of everything the boulder represents. When she faces him, she does not overpower him. She defeats him by waiting and by listening. And it is Sokka, of all people, who names it out loud from the stands. He notices that she won, not through strength, but through patience, through attention, through the willingness to let her opponent commit first, and to feel exactly where he was before she moved. Set that against the backdrop of the earlier fights. The boulder announced every intention with his whole body. The blind bandit gives nothing away and reads everything. Her blindness, the thing the crowd wrote off as a costume, is the very source of the skill they came to watch, and they still cannot recognise it for what it is. And here is where Bumi's riddle closes like a circuit. The teacher who waits and listens before striking is not a hypothetical the boy is searching for across the whole Earth Kingdom. She is right there, winning by doing precisely that. Aang recognises the description in her fighting because he was primed to recognise it. And the recognition is the whole point of the sequence. The advice and the fighter were designed to meet in his mind at exactly this moment. The show is arguing, without ever saying so, that mastery does not always look like power. Sometimes it looks like stillness, like restraint, like a person who has turned what the world calls a limitation into a form of perception no one else in the arena possesses. There is a nice irony in how the match ends up structured. The announcer, Xin Fu, offers a sack of gold to anyone who can defeat the champion, and Aang volunteers. But he does not really want to fight her. Once he is in the ring, he tells her, in effect, that he does not want to fight at all, that he only wants to talk to her. The contest that the crowd understands as a battle for gold is, for him, a pretext for a conversation. He has come to ask, not to win. And when the match is over, he chases her down to make the request plainly, asking her to be his earthbending teacher. She refuses. She tells him to leave her alone. The genius the arena refused to see does not particularly want to be seen by him either. And the chapter of her recruitment does not resolve here so much as it stalls, which is its own kind of honesty about how these things go. Set beside all this is the failure of the obvious alternative. In the same episode, Aang and Sokka take a free trial lesson at Master Yu's Earthbending Academy, and the contrast could not be more instructive. Master Yu teaches earthbending as a set of rigid punching stances, formal and fixed, the body locked into prescribed shapes. It is the institutional version of the element, earth as discipline and posture, the kind of thing that comes with a sign over the door and a free trial to draw you in. Aang works through it and concludes, without drama, that this is not the teacher he is looking for. The self-taught champion who wins by listening, and the credentialed academy that drills stances at paying students sit on opposite sides of the same question. One of them has a school and a reputation. The other has the actual insight. The show knows which is which, and so, by the end of the lesson, does Aang. There is a thread that connects the girl in the arena to a very different figure the series introduced a season earlier, and the thread is this idea of brilliance that grows outside of any recognised system. At the Northern Air Temple lives a man known only as the Mechanist, and his story is one of invention, driven entirely by necessity and love. He is a refugee. He explains that a flood badly injured his infant son, a boy named Teo, and killed Teo's mother, and that everything he has built since flows from that catastrophe. He did not set out to be a great inventor. He set out to give his son a life, and the inventing was the means. What he built at the temple is remarkable precisely because it began from air nomad relics that were never meant for people like him. The temple held gliders, the tools of airbenders, useless to anyone without the gift. The Mechanist took them apart and redesigned them into fan-like contraptions that let non-airbenders fly, and then he went further and rigged the temple itself to pump hot air currents outside so that the gliders would catch extra lift. Consider the shape of that achievement. A man with no bending of any kind looked at the sacred equipment of a people defined by flight and found a way to give flight to everyone else. He states his reason without embellishment. He built the temple's flying technology so that Teo could live an equal life in the air alongside the children who were born able to leave the ground. The invention is not a hobby. It is a father refusing to let his son be grounded by an injury the world would have called final. Teo answers that refusal in the most direct way possible. He has a glider chair, an invention built to compensate for his paraplegia. And when he demonstrates it, he performs an aerial trick so accomplished that it stops Aang short. Aang, remember, is an airbender, born to the sky, raised in it. And watching Teo, he admits that he does not think he can do the same move. Hold on to that for a moment. The child, who is supposed to be earthbound, is doing something in the air that the Last Airbender cannot match. The Mechanist did not merely restore what the flood took. He built his son a way of moving through the world that outpaces the people who never lost anything at all. The same episode shows this inventive mind at play in smaller and stranger ways. And these details matter because they tell you the man cannot stop solving problems. He tracks time with a candle rigged with spark powder that flashes once every hour. And when it has flashed 4 times, he calls the result for a candle, a homemade clock with its own homemade vocabulary. He mentions almost in passing that he invented a finger-safe knife sharpener and that it took him 3 attempts to get right. There is something deeply human in that admission. The great flying temple and the small, safe knife sharpener come from the same restless, practical mind, and he is willing to tell you that even the small thing took him 3 tries. Failure is folded into his method. He does not present himself as a genius who arrives at answers fully formed. He presents himself as a man who keeps trying until the thing works and no one loses a finger. Set the 2 figures side by side and the chapter's real subject comes into focus. A blind girl becomes the finest earthbender in her region by turning her blindness into perception, and a crowd insists on treating that gift as a costume. A refugee with no bending at all re-engineers the relics of a lost people so his injured son can fly. And he measures his days by a candle. He wired himself. Neither of them was trained by the recognised authorities. Neither fits the picture the world holds of what a muster is supposed to look like. Master Yu has the academy and the stances and the sign over the door, and the Mechanist has a candle that flashes and a sun doing tricks in the sky. The series keeps pointing gently and without lecturing at the same quiet truth. The brilliance that changes things tends to grow in the places the experts were not looking, invented by people the experts were quick to dismiss. A serious show can only afford a certain kind of comedy once it trusts its own weight. And Avatar earns it early. The story it tells is heavy. A war has burned for 100 years. A boy carries the guilt of a vanished world, and children are asked to end something that has outlived every adult who started it. And yet, threaded through all of that gravity, the series keeps a second cast running along beneath the first. These are the incompetent ones, the merchants with no luck, the soldiers who cannot soldier, the officials who boast and then flinch. They exist to fail, and their failure is the show breathing out. Consider the man who has become the emblem of all of them, the Cabbage merchant. His first appearance comes in the episode called The King of Amashu, and the scene is almost cruel in its economy. Overzealous city guards earthbend his cart of vegetables, clean off a ledge, sending the whole load tumbling, and only then do they permit him to enter. His response is the line that would follow him across 3 seasons, the strangled cry of, "My cabbages." Think about what that moment establishes. He has done nothing wrong. He is simply present, a small man moving produce through a world at war, and the machinery of that world destroys him for no reason and with no apology. The guards are not villains, they're careless, and carelessness in this show has a body count that runs from tragic to comic depending on who is standing under it. For the Cabbage merchant, it is always comic and always at his expense. The voice behind that ruin is said to belong to the actor James Sy, who by most accounts performed the Cabbage merchant throughout the original Nickelodeon run. It is a small role that became a large one through sheer persistence. A running gag sustained by a performer willing to return again and again to the same note of dismay. There is a discipline in that, in playing a man whose entire function is to lose, and to lose loudly, and to mean it every single time. But the merchant is only the most famous face of a much broader pattern, and the pattern reaches upward into the ranks of people who are supposed to be competent. Look at the early Fire Nation, and specifically at the ship carrying the banished prince. In the 9th episode of the first season, the vessel suddenly changes course without Zuko's orders, and the prince does what any young man convinced of his own importance would do. He accuses the crew of mutiny. He imagines betrayal, a plot, the slow poison of disloyalty, and the culprit, when it surfaces, is his uncle. Iroh has quietly redirected the entire ship to a port, derailing the hunt for the Avatar, so that he can search the local merchants for a lost Paisho tile, a single game piece, the Lotus tile. What makes the scene land is the calm with which Iroh justifies it. He explains, in effect, that the tile is essential to the unusual strategy he employs in Paisho. And he goes further, admitting that most people think the Lotus tile insignificant. He knows how it sounds. He offers no defence beyond his own conviction that a small thing matters more than everyone assumes. To Zuko, this is incompetence of a peculiarly maddening kind, the derailment of a sacred mission for a hobby. To the audience, watching much later with knowledge Zuko does not have, the line about the Lotus tile carries a second weight it cannot yet reveal. But taken purely in the moment, on first viewing, it is a bumbling old man wasting a warship on a board game. The comedy is real before the meaning arrives, and the show is patient enough to let it be only comedy for now. That same 9th episode spreads its incompetence generously across both sides. Among the young heroes, Sokka spends one of the group's 3 remaining copper coins, a real fortune given how little they have, on a whistle that does not even work. It produces nothing a human ear can register. Katara delivers the verdict with the flat honesty that siblings reserve for one another, noting that even Momo thinks it is a piece of junk. The lemur, the animal, the creature, with no stake in commerce or pride, has appraised the purchase and found it worthless. There is a tenderness under the joke. Sokka is the one who plans, who counts coins, who tries to be the practical mind of the group. And here he is squandering their money on silence. And the merchants who sell to these travellers are no more reliable than the ones who buy. In the same stretch of episode, a pirate merchant attempts to sell what he calls exotic curios to Aang and Katara, and when pressed on what the items actually are, he confesses that he is not entirely sure. He is selling mysteries he does not understand, trading on the vague promise of the exotic. It is a small, honest admission of a dishonest trade, and it fits the world the show keeps sketching in the margins. The war has produced a whole economy of people improvising, guessing, moving objects they cannot name, hoping someone will pay. By the second season, the show scales its incompetence up, from individuals to institutions, and the results are funnier because the stakes are higher. In the 13th episode of that season, the Fire Nation brings an enormous drill against the Great Wall of Ba Sing Se, and War Minister Ching assures Azula that no earthbending could so much as scratch the drill's metal shell. It is the kind of guarantee that engineers offer and history punishes. Azula listens, and then, without a flicker of disagreement, she immediately hedges his claim by dispatching Mai and Dai Li to eliminate the earthbenders anyway, just to be on the safe side. This is the difference between the competent and the incompetent, laid bare in a single exchange. Ching believes his own machine. Azula believes nothing that has not been secured twice. She does not argue with his confidence. She simply refuses to share it. And that refusal is why she is dangerous, and he is merely a man with a title. On the other side of that wall, the defenders are no steadier. An Earth Kingdom officer tells Aang, the Avatar himself, that his help is not needed, and insists that the Fire Nation cannot penetrate this wall. It is a grand claim, delivered with the certainty of a man who has never watched the thing he is guarding fail. And then moments later, the certainty collapses. Asked again whether he might want the Avatar's help after all, he reverses himself entirely and says simply, "Yes, please." The whole arc of institutional pride and institutional panic compressed into 2 lines and a few seconds. He did not need help. Now he would very much like some. The show is not finished with him. When the officer boasts that the city is impenetrable, someone reminds him that Iroh himself had already gotten through it once. The wall he stakes his confidence on has a history of being breached, and he knows it, and all he can manage is a stammered concession. He allows that technically, yes, this happened, but adds that the intruder was quickly expunged. It is the language of a bureaucrat, covering a hole in the record. Technically, yes. The competent do not need the word technically. It is the favourite word of people defending a claim they already suspect is false. And even the defender's own ranks crack under pressure. As the drill approaches, a member of the Earthbender unit known as the Terror Team simply loses his nerve, panicking and shouting that they are doomed. A teammate has to steady him, telling him in effect to get a hold of himself, before the panicked man apologises and gathers what composure he can. It is a small human beat inside a large mechanical threat, the reminder that behind every proud wall and every impervious shell there are ordinary people who are frightened and who sometimes say so at exactly the wrong moment. The gag survives all the way to the final season, though by then it has softened into something warmer. In the 15th episode of the 3rd season, Sokka is reunited with his father Hakoda inside the prison called the Boiling Rock, and the reunion carries a joke rooted in the same world of bumbling guards and stolen uniforms. Hakoda admits that he almost punched his own son in the gut because Sokka was wearing a stolen guard uniform and looked, for a moment, like the enemy. Sokka's reply is the reply of a boy who has been mistaken for a Fire Nation soldier one too many times. He says in effect that he has run into that problem earlier. The incompetence of the guards, the interchangeable uniforms, the whole apparatus of an occupying force that cannot tell its own men apart has become something the heroes can wear and hide inside. The joke that began with Cabbages tumbling off a ledge ends with a disguise good enough to fool a father. That is the quiet argument these running gags make across the whole series. The war is enormous and the danger is real, but it is administered on the ground by people who lose their carts, buy broken whistles, sell things they cannot name, and guarantee walls that have already fallen. The competence lives at the top in a handful of minds. Everywhere else, the world is held together by people getting it wrong, and the show lets them gently and lets you laugh. There is a phrase Jack DeSena is said to have reached for in an interview marking 20 years since the show first aired, and it is the phrase that this whole closing conversation turns on. He called Sokka, the character he voiced, a small-minded genius in a way. Consider how much is packed into that qualification, that small hedge of in a way. He meant that Sokka is very smart, genuinely and unusually smart, but that he begins the series carrying a narrow and limited worldview, a set of assumptions he has not yet learned to question. The intelligence is real from the first episode. What is missing at the start is the width for it to work in. That tension between a sharp mind and a small frame around it was not fully there in the earliest plans for the character. Several retrospective interviews, the ones gathered by outlets like Nick Alive and Winter is Coming, describe how Sokka's personality was reworked by the writers after DeSena auditioned. His comedic delivery during the casting process pushed the character in a direction the writing had not originally intended, toward more humour than was first planned. That reshapes how we should read him. The jokes were not written first and then handed to an actor. The actor arrived with the jokes already living in his voice, and the show bent to meet them. The comedy is not a coat of paint over a serious strategist. It is woven into the same thread as the strategy, which is exactly why the two are so easy to mistake for opposites. And people did mistake them for years. This is the long-running fan argument. The closing chapter has been circling the smartest against the dumbest, and Sokka is the character who breaks the argument in half because he keeps appearing on both sides of it. To watch him is to watch someone who can look foolish and be brilliant inside the same scene, sometimes inside the same breath. The critics who went back and ranked his moments understood this. Screen Rant assembled a list of what it called Sokka's 10 smartest moments, and the entries read almost like a rebuttal to anyone who filed him under comic relief. At the top of that list sits a quiet scene in a library, in Wan Shi Tong's library, buried among the collected knowledge of the world. Sokka decodes an ancient calendar. What he finds is not a treasure or a weapon, it is a pattern. He works out that firebenders lose their power during a solar eclipse, that there is a window in which the entire strength of the Fire Nation simply goes dark. This is not a flashy discovery. It is reading and cross-referencing and the patience to sit with old records until they give up their secret. And it becomes the foundation of the Day of Black Sun invasion plan, the single largest offensive the heroes attempt. An entire military strategy grows out of one person, taking a dusty calendar seriously. The same ranking points to the Fire Nation, drill grinding toward the walls of Ba Sing Se. Sokka infiltrates the machine, and rather than trying to overpower it, he tricks an engineer into revealing how the drill can be destroyed from the inside. Notice the shape of that. He does not fight the engineer. He talks to him, and he lets the man's own expertise become the instrument of the machine's undoing. The intelligence here is social as much as mechanical, an understanding that the fastest way past a locked door is often the person holding the key, if you know how to make them want to hand it over. Then there is the swordsmanship, in the episode called Sokka's Master. In the 3rd season, he trains under Master Piandao, and what the list singles out is not that he becomes physically formidable, though he learns. It is how he passes the tests. He passes them through in unconventional, clever responses, answers that work by reframing the problem, rather than by meeting it head on with force. A lesser student answers the test as it is asked. Sokka answers the test as it should have been asked. That, more than any duel, is the evidence the critics wanted, because it shows the mind operating even inside a discipline built around the body. When the lens widens from Sokka alone to the whole cast, CBR published its own reckoning, a list of the 10 smartest characters in the Avatar franchise, and Sokka earns a place on it. The write-up does not pretend he is flawless. It grants openly that he is a jokester and can be dense. And then it turns that admission into the argument, noting that despite all of it, he has outsmarted almost all of his foes. This is the honest version of the case for him. You do not have to deny the foolishness. You only have to keep watching until the record settles. And the record shows him winning the contests that matter. He's not alone on that franchise list, and the company he keeps is worth sitting with, because it tells you what the show actually means by intelligence. King Bumi is there, the old king of Amashu, whose eccentric persona reads, on a first encounter, as something close to madness. CBR credits him with the strategic surrender of Amashu to the Fire Nation, a decision that looks like defeat and is nothing of the kind, and then with reclaiming the city during the Day of Black Sun. The surrender was patience, disguised as loss. The reclaiming was the patience paying out. His performance of the harmless lunatic was a cover, and underneath it ran real tactical brilliance, held in reserve until the eclipse gave him his moment. Zuko appears on the list too, described as an incredible tactician, and the proof offered is one that his own family could not manage. He located Aang when generations of previous Fire Lords and hunters had failed. Strip away the anger and the wandering, and there is a genuine talent for pursuit, for reading a trail that others had given up as cold. The obsession that drives him is easy to read as a flaw, and often it is. But the same fixation is what lets him solve a problem that the entire preceding machinery of the Fire Nation could not. And then Azula, whose intelligence CBR frames through method rather than raw power. It credits her strategy of exhausting Aang before capturing him, wearing the target down instead of striking once and hoping. And her successful infiltration of Ba Sing Se from within the city. She does not batter the great walls that stopped everyone else. She goes inside and takes the city from its own centre. This channel has looked at Azula before, at her story and at the machinery of her mind, but set here on a list of the smartest, she becomes something slightly different. She is the proof that intelligence in this world is not tied to which side you fight for. It is a tool, and the show hands it to hero and villain alike. That is the quiet resolution this whole discussion arrives at. The smartest against the dumbest was never really a ranking of who has the higher mind. It was a question about what intelligence looks like from the outside, and how easily we mistake the surface for the substance. Sokka looks dense and outsmarts almost everyone. Bumi looks mad and outweights an empire. Zuko looks lost and finds what no one else could. Azula looks like pure force and wins by patience and misdirection. Desaina's small phrase, the small-minded genius in a way, turns out to describe more than one character on that library shelf. The mind was always there. The show simply asks you to look past the jokes, the eccentricity, the rage, and the fear, until you can see it working. If you have followed this far, you already understand the shape of the thing. The distance between the smartest and the dumbest characters in Avatar was never a scale of intelligence at all. It was a difference in what each one was willing to see. Toph reads the ground beneath a lie, and Sokka reads a plan into a hopeless fight. And Iroh reads a grieving boy across a tea table, and each of them is measured not by how much they know, but by how honestly they look at the world in front of them. The characters the show treats as foolish are the ones who have stopped looking, the ones so certain of their own story that 100 years of evidence cannot reach them. Azula, brilliant and precise, understands everything except the one thing that would have saved her. And the boy she chased across the world grows wise only when he admits how wrong he has been. Measure for it what that means for a show made for children. It refuses to flatter cleverness, and it refuses to punish gentleness, and it lets its quietest, oldest, most defeated characters carry the deepest understanding of all. Wisdom here is a warmth, not a weapon. So the last image is not a battle or a throne. It is an old man in a small tea shop in a city that once burned, pouring for anyone who walks through the door, having lost everything and chosen kindness anyway. That is the smartest character in Avatar. He is simply the one who understood what all the knowledge was for. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next.